Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So the intro montage of this episode, I spent doing some of the foundational work to build the intercooler tubing for the SC. And I have all of my clamshell clamps on the car where they need to be. We have one on the throttle body, one on compressor outlet, and then one on intercooler inlet, one on intercooler outlet. And these may look like Wiggins assemblies, but they are not exactly. So these are what are called Pegasus clamps, or as I have began affectionately referring to them as Wiggins clamps. These are Chinese knockoff Wiggins clamps, and while they are not of the same quality as the actual Adele Wiggins assemblies, I had used one of these assemblies years ago on the Mark IV and had really good luck with it. And then going with the purple theme on this car, as well as trying to do it semi-low budget, the Wiggins clamps were the correct option and the correct choice. So with all of that being said, now we need to actually start laying tubes or building tubes, running tubes on this thing. Have the bumper in place so that way I don't just build these tubes completely or in a completely abstract manner. So I actually have some bit of confines to work around, and I have all of this tubing sitting here for all of the intercooler tubes and then the 4-inch stuff for an intake tube later on. So all of this stuff aside from these 3.5-inch long radius bends here, and I guess the 3.5-inch tight radius. So the 3.5-inch stuff by itself, that is all new material. Everything else, these are materials I had sitting around. And we also have a nice Turbo Smart blow-off valve, which we'll get to this in a little while when it is time to actually place that. But I'm going to take all of these pieces of tubing and, with any luck, be able to build a pretty nice intercooler tube system for this thing, and then all of the engine bay plumbing, at least for charge air and exhaust, will be completed at that point in time, and we can move on to the next step of the project then. So I think I am going to begin with the cold side tube, as this is going to be the more complex of the two tubes, namely due to the area behind the bumper right here, where there are a number of OE hard lines that are running in that area, and it's kind of the busiest and the most challenging section of this. I like to knock out the most challenging portions first and then work my way backwards towards the easier stuff, so that way you don't have anything big and daunting looming over your head throughout the course of a project like this. Well, making really good progress with the lower section of the SC's cold side intercooler tube. We are looped up to this spot right here, and I have the next section cut, which will ultimately terminate in the coupler's flange. So I have the flange right here, and I wanted to make a quick note about this many pieces that come from China, many weld flanges and bungs and things along those lines, they come anodized. And I'm assuming they do this to prevent the pieces from corroding and looking nasty. But while you can weld anodized aluminum, I prefer not to, and it isn't necessary to weld anodized aluminum for a piece like this. So what I do is a bit of prep work. If you see above my thumb right there, there's that really short shoulder. I'll sand that down. The kind of chamfered portion I will run on my smaller belt sander to put a bevel on it and to take the anodization or the anodizing off there. And then the longer flat where my thumb is at right now, I'll come and hold against my little Scotch-Brite wheel right here to take that off. So I'm not super concerned about the inside of the piece, as that doesn't have any bearing really on the exterior quality of the weld. But it's important to take that anodizing off, since again, this isn't a marine application or anything like that. And anodizing can put some kind of nasty, almost sulfur type smell in the air. So again, it's important, as I say pretty frequently, use your PPE, gear up, protect all of your different senses and vital organs. With all that being said, let's go ahead, get this piece prepped, weld it to the final section for this lower tube, and then we can begin on the upper tube. With the lower section of the SC's cold side intercooler tube completed, I can now move on to the upper section. So from this vantage point, you can see my connector down there, and I just have to go from point A to point B. It should be fairly straightforward and fairly simple, I'm hoping. The difficult portion will be kind of making my way around this hose right here, as I don't really want to change the orientation of it or anything. It appears to be either an AC line or a power steering line, either of which I don't really feel like messing around with. So I will do what I do and make the tube fit around that, as opposed to making that line fit around the tube. So I have my second to last bend right there, and the last bend is right here, as far as the 3.5 inch stuff is concerned. So between this bend, that bend, and then this little leftover section of the tight radius bend, I think I should be able to make this work. So let me start cutting, start fitting, and let's see if I can turn this idea into a reality. Today we're going to knock out the hot side intercooler tube for the SC. So this one will be much more straightforward than the cold side tube, with all of the stuff, like I said earlier, down in this area that I had to work around. This side, there really aren't any impediments underneath here. You guys can see, nice, clear, and open. And I'm working with a smaller diameter tube, which will make it that much easier to fit everything in place. The first section of the SC's hot side intercooler tube is completed. So this ended up being a little bit trickier than I thought it was going to be, just trying to get clearance around the alternator, which probably isn't a great way to film this right here. But the actual stud that the power cable connects to, had to kind of dance the tube around that a little bit, but everything's good to go at this point, and I'm now ready to knock out the lower section. So finally, I'm onto a tube that, at least by the looks of it right now, should be pretty straightforward and pretty easy. This will be a little bit less than a 90-degree bend coming off of the intercooler, and then whatever this bend ends up being right here, I should be able to make it out of 2 pieces, and everything will be good to go. So rather than talk about it, let's just do it, and let's get this intercooler tubing wrapped up. With the SC's lower hot side intercooler tube completed, it's now time to build the mounting brackets. So why I want to build these is you can see how much movement I have with these tubes the way that they sit currently. And right now, this tube is resting on the alternator lug, which is not a good thing. And this tube over here also has quite a bit of movement that it can have currently. So there are some threaded holes on the sides of the chassis on both sides, and I'm just going to make a simple locating tab for both sides. if I locate the lower section of each of the tubes, then the upper section will be fixed in place a little bit better. And these coupling assemblies will still allow for enough movement as the engine rocks around. Everything will be good and we won't have any rupturing or anything along those lines. So we'll use this 2-inch aluminum strip that I have right here, just because I have an excess of it. And like I said, a couple of simple tabs, get those knocked out, and then I can move on to locating the blow-off valve and the IAT bung. Now that the mounting brackets for the lower sections of the SC's intercooler tubing are now completed, they're installed and everything else, I can now shift focus to putting the blow-off valve in its new home. So what I chose for the blow-off valve is this TurboSmart Pro port in purple, obviously, and I think that it is going to live somewhere up in here. I like doing this kind of in this area, so it's a subtle detail that you can see if you know where to look. And I know that there may be some thoughts as to the benefit of putting the blow-off valve on the hot side or the cold side tube. In my experience, it doesn't really matter all that much, so I have much more space on the hot side over here, so that is where it's going to live. So this shouldn't be too bad. The only thing I really have to pay attention to is where my mounting bracket is, as I want to make this weld job as easy as I can for myself. So, I don't know, maybe I'll put it somewhere like that, right there. It seems pretty good. But the one thing that I do need to do with this is I need to recope the flange. The flange is set up for 3 or 3.5 inch tubing, not so much 2.5. So, if I put it on this tube, you can see that I'll need to alter the cope and the notch a little bit to get this to fit effectively. But not the end of the world. So let me go ahead and get the flange off of the blow-off valve, and I can proceed to recope it and get ready to weld this flange onto the intercooler tube. I have a quick tech tip for you in regards to blow-off valve flanges. So I've tried installing and welding them in a variety of different ways, and by far this is the most effective that I've found. I will weld the flange on first and then punch the hole second. So you aren't trying to weld just on a very small little edge of the tubing. If you do it this way, you can use all of the tubing as a heat sink. You don't have to worry about really much of it burning away or anything like that. And then when you come in and punch the hole secondly, you can really tailor fit the hole to the side of the flange. I'll come in with cartridge rolls and or flap wheels to smooth everything out, and it makes for a much nicer end product. So if you guys haven't tried to weld a blow-off valve flange on in this manner, I highly suggest giving it a shot, as this may save you a whole bunch of grief as opposed to doing it another way. With the SC's blow-off valve in place, we have two more things I want to accomplish in this episode. The first of which is locating the intake air temp sensor. So I ordered this from Haltech. It's an authentic Haltech intake air temp sensor, or at least whoever they get their supply from. And I think, judging based upon the length of the wiring harness, somewhere on the bottom of this intercooler tube is going to be its home. So let me mark that out. I can punch the hole, we can weld it on, and then I think the last thing I'd like to do in this episode is address some sort of an intake tube for the SC. With the completion of the SC's intake tube, that marks the finishing point for all of the aluminum tube work on this car. So I could not be happier with the way that all of this came out, how cheap it all was, since I was able to reuse a bunch of materials that I just had sitting in my bins. And most importantly, the charge air system is now a completed sealed system. So one thing I may do is swap out the O-rings on the Wiggins clamps for some actual genuine Wiggins O-rings, as I don't like the limited interference that these O-rings have. I'd rather have something that's a little bit more, it'll be a pain to install them, but something that's a little bit more concrete and solid to seal all of these assemblies up. However, I may also boost leak test this, see if any of the assemblies are leaking, and if they aren't, maybe I'll run it as is for a while. That's still up in the air, still to be determined. Most importantly right now though, that sub-project is completed on this car. So with that being said, I think that will be about the end of this episode. Now, hopefully you guys were able to bear with me, as for the past 2 days I have been sick. I don't know exactly what it is, but headache, body aches, and just a general feeling of unwellness. So hopefully that passes soon, as we have a lot of additional work to do on this car and everything else around here. But I'm sure you guys don't care and don't want to hear me whine about not feeling good. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. So thank you guys, as always, for coming along on all these different journeys and adventures with me. We have made excellent progress on the SC Resurrection project, and we're down to kind of the last few ancillary items. Need to address the cooling system, need to address the exhaust, need to address the fuel system, need to get a new set of tires for it, and then the car needs to be tuned. And also, I'd probably like to have all of the aluminum work powder coated, and that'll be more my style than just raw aluminum. But in any case, we've made excellent progress on this car, and hopefully before the end of the year, I'll be able to take it out and play around with it and feel this car under positive pressure once again after all of these years, and that will be something very special. But that will be then. This is now, and right now we are done with this episode. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, check out the website for manifolds, for merch, for all things good that way, including my 15th anniversary t-shirts and hoodies. Be sure to scoop those up before the end of the year, because come 2025, they will be nothing more than a fond memory. But with all of that being said, that'll be the end of this one, and I will see you guys in the next episode.